the Kaizen Podcast.
Okay, Greg, on this episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about, as you're planning projects and you're kind of gathering requirements, how much do you think you should be setting all the requirements up front, kind of like as a waterfall method versus evolving over time, kind of like in an agile method? I might be misusing those terms, but that's kind of how I think of them is, should you be gathering everything up front and then building, or do you think you should be constantly tweaking and evolving?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, I think there are definitely arguments for both sides. I think you'll probably have a differing opinion than me. I think for me, I would prefer that everything is set up front before we start working. That's not always super realistic. So I would say generally the kind of method of communication that we communicate to our customers is this. The specificity of requirements and detail of requirements should match the expectations around timeline. And what I mean by that is, if you're the kind of person and you're the kind of company where it's like, hey, we have everything documented, here is everything we need. If you just deliver this, we will be super happy. Then I'm totally fine with that. And then let's say like, hey, this is going to take a month or this is going to take 2 weeks and we will hit that deadline. Mm-hmm. If you're of the opinion of like, hey, like we don't really know, like this is like a good start, but we kind of need to see it and play with it. That's also totally fine. But then we can't be super stringent on deadlines. And the reason for that, and this is top of mind for me because I'm dealing with this with a client right now where we scoped out a project, put in all the requirements, everyone reviewed it on their side, and like, hey, this is exactly what we need. This is great, cool, like no changes needed. And we're like, great, this will take 3 weeks. Then 1 week in, we kind of show like a preview, and there's like, oh, but like, what about this? Or what about that field? Or like, it also needs to do this. And we get all these other requirements that weren't there initially. So we like add those in. And then after week 2, we do the same thing where we show, okay, cool, here's what we do. And we get a whole nother slew of requirements. Mm-hmm. And so then we have to have a conversation with them. We're like, hey, like this is not going to come out on time, or like these other things are going to get deprioritized. Mm-hmm. So like we probably could have done a better job communicating the timeline piece, but I think it puts ops people in a really tough position when requirements and scope expands, but the timelines do not expand.
I was just reading Hacker News last night, and I saved this quote into a doc that I have for quotes. It was someone wrote, "Be conservative in what will be delivered and liberal when it will be delivered." So I really like that idea of like not committing to so much, because this is a challenge that I have personally where, customer says, oh, can you add this in? I'm like, yeah, for sure. We're already on track. Let's just do it. But I think that it's reasonable to push back and say, we scoped this out and gave you an estimate. Now you're making changes. That's really going to push this out a significant amount other than just like adding a field or something. So my impression where I'm going to disagree with you is that I don't think most customers, and the reason that I think that they work with us, you may have a different customer base or how they work with you, but they're working with us because they don't know what to do. They know that they have a problem. We're making recommendations and we're guiding them on what needs to be done. But to an extent, I need to see how it'll work before I commit to how it will. Like I need to be able to play with it, as you alluded to. Like imagine you were trying to describe Salesforce to a person who'd never used it. You've got to say, well, what do you want your stages to be? They're like, I'm not quite sure. Like we haven't ever had stages before. And if you're building a CPQ implementation, there's just so much that goes into it that you can't know on day one, which is why they're contracting with us. Maybe I'm in the wrong. I'm definitely down to hash that idea out.
That makes sense. So then are you okay proceeding to start work when you have very little requirements?
Yeah, oftentimes we'll do that. Yeah, we'll begin work. Because, we do something different where all of our customers are on time and materials basis. We don't do fixed bid projects. So that changes things. Most big consulting firms will do very fixed bid projects. I have a friend who worked at a big one, and I was asking, he was a project manager, and I asked him, when a customer says, hey, can we make this little change? How do you handle that? And he said, I forward it to the sales team. I was like, you don't even talk to the customer about it? He goes, nope, we just forward it to the sales team. They deal with it. If they want a change order, the sales rep will loop me in and confirm those things, but that's outside of scope. And that feels like a poor experience from a customer perspective. Like I want the ability to be dynamic in a lot of situations. And I don't like the idea of the only way we can do this is another change order. So that's why we've taken that tack with our business. And it's not a way to pitch my own business, but just show that I think I would want to consume consulting services in that way more than I would want to outline everything. I'm a big person of like jump in and start to build it before I sit down and spend 5 hours scoping it out. So that's probably my personal bias.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think so how do you handle then when people are asking you, they'll give you a project and like, hey, like I need like some estimate on like how much this is going to cost?
Yeah. So like every good answer, it depends. It's a fair question, and we try to give our customers a range. We'll say, you want this done. It's going to take about 10 to 20 hours. You may make 100 changes, and we're not good. I mean, we do document all the changes, but it does happen at times where customers come back and they're like, this project has taken 3 months. We thought it was a month-long project. And, our response is, it was, but you've changed it 100 times. And so that can be a poor experience from the customer if we don't do a good job of setting expectations as well. But that's part of our pitch to them, is that you don't know everything today. And I don't want to spend 2 months scoping it out. I want to start building and start getting traction. Like in my mind, let's get to value as quick as possible. And for them, if they start to see progress, that feels more valuable than if we're just sitting in meetings talking about what do you want this pick list value to be before we can start building. Well, do you handle it differently on your end?
No, I think it's pretty similar. Like I'll give them like an idea of what I think it'll cost. I'll say it's going to be 10 grand, it's going to be 20 grand. But I think what I don't do, and what I don't really want to have to do, is every time there's a change, be like, okay, that's going to be like another hour. That's going to be
change order.
Hours.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah, like I don't want to deal with change orders. And so like the downside of that is if I say it's going to be 10 grand and then they get an invoice for 20, they're pissed.
Yes.
Part of that is, and even if you set the expectations up front of like, hey, as things change, it's going to take more time, it's going to cost more money. Mm-hmm. I think like sometimes startup people have a short-term memory for warnings around bad news.
Yeah. One thing that I'd heard a person I referred to that worked at a bigger consulting company, he told me that oftentimes he'll take some of these little ticky-tacky changes and just do them, but he would note them so that when they have to go back to the customer and say, look, we're going to overrun budget, and they push back, he can say, look at the 30 things we did for free. It's reasonable for us to start charging for this change that you want. Like we've already done a lot of things pro bono, like we let it slide. We can't let it slide anymore. And it's easier to make that case, I think, to the customer when you can actually show them what you've done versus just saying abstractly, well, remember those things we tried to do a couple months ago? But he said he was very diligent about documenting anything he kind of did for free. But when you scope out projects, do you give a dollar number, or do you give like an hour, or how do you estimate that?
Both. I mean, we're pretty upfront with like, here is what dev hours cost, here is what project management hours cost, here's what like analyst hours cost. Mm-hmm. And then we'll give an hour estimate and then give some estimate around like, hey, like it's going to cost 20 hours, 10 of it's going to be dev hours, 10 of it'll be like analyst hours. Yeah.
So you can give them kind of a target dollar amount, but it could flex left or right depending on if they go easy on the dev stuff or if they go heavy on the dev stuff or something.
Yeah, correct.
And as you're scoping these projects out, how much information do you need typically before you're willing to give an estimate of like, this should take about, 10 grand and 30 hours of whatever? Like how far into, like, do you scope out for a week and do you charge them for that time, or how do you think about doing that?
I've been doing this long enough to where I can generally scope like pretty accurately with very little information. So this project that we just rolled out, I think I'm going to end up billing like 24 grand. I told him it would cost 25 grand. And I told him that like after like half an hour of scoping it.
Yeah. Most of the time you can get a sense of what they're looking to accomplish, and you can take the experience that you've had and all the projects you've done and say, this is going to be kind of the window, and you're going to get pretty close.
Yeah. And also like every startup thinks they're unique, but they're really not. Like everyone's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So that helps a lot too. And I'm like, hey, cool, you want to do this project. You're like forgetting about these 5 things. Oh yeah, it's a great idea. We should totally do that too.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. So the scoping piece is fine. I'm not like, I feel like I haven't found a great way to handle the constant changing.
Yeah.
And like, I think this is like a topic we'll discuss on another episode, but I think a lot of times there's this idea around flexibility and like, hey, you're a startup, like you're moving fast, you got to be flexible. But I think with a lot of people that, I don't know about your experience, but a lot of people that we work with, that mandate around flexibility really just covers up poor planning.
Yeah, they don't want to be disciplined.
Yeah.
I do agree with that. It is true because I'm not a super disciplined person and I really enjoy that. I call it flexibility. But the reality is I don't want to follow a process. I want to do it how I want to do it, which is not a solid way of operating. So I will agree that that's a bias that I have. The solution is you need a project manager who's hyper disciplined and will follow a process. And you need to be able to be comfortable with that. Because I think you see this a lot with startups where they say, this is how we're going to do it going forward, until they're like, we're not going to do that. Right? A deal comes in at the 11th hour right before the quarter closes, and every sales rep or every sales leader says, we'll never cave again. And then they'll cave again. It's just hard to be disciplined when you have these competing priorities and deadlines and pressure coming from all different directions to always be consistent. So you almost need someone who's got that mentality to be your project manager almost.
Yeah, I think like one thing that I say a lot to our team is like, to be good at consulting, you either need to be hyper creative or hyper organized.
That's good. I like that a lot. So you said that you'll oftentimes give a customer an estimate after about 30 minutes of talking to them about the project, which I think that we're not dissimilar in how we do it as well. Do you have customers that say, no, we need a fixed bid and we cannot exceed $20,000? Like, let's do that. Do you take those projects on?
It depends on how much I trust the people I'm working with.
Mm.
So like most of the time we do not, because the reason that we're getting called in a lot of the time is because like there are issues around operations. So I will do it if it's somebody that I've worked with a lot, and that person and I have an understanding around like expectations.
Yeah. Because one thing that's nice about giving an estimate is you can say, look, this will cost 20 grand. But then at the end of the project, if you're efficient and you come in and say, look, it only costs us 15 grand, you should be happy about that. Like, hey, customer, we estimated 20, but we're only charging you 15, not because we overscoped it. We just became very efficient for you. And so that gives you credibility for when things run over a little bit. So there's got to be that balance of, I think it's easy for the customer to be frustrated because things have gone over, but they're never like high-fiving you because it came in under.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think that scoping things out ahead of time can be, super valuable to give the customer an expectation for what it's going to take to get it done. But in my mind, I really push back on when customers say, I need a fixed bid and I can't exceed this, because I just know that I've either got to spend a month scoping this out and charge you a bunch of money for our time to do that, or we need to have flexibility because what you want today is going to be different than what you want tomorrow.
Totally. And I'll actually I'll say this is going to probably get some pushback for this, but most of the time when people are saying they must have a fixed cost thing, it is because that is what their finance team is demanding.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it says something about you if your own finance team doesn't trust you to like spend money correctly.
That's right. If they don't trust you, then that's a big concern, right?
Yeah. Cause like I know, like the companies I know where someone's like, dude, my CFO needs a fixed bid. I'm thinking like, yeah, I would too, because I don't think you know what you're doing.
Fair. I don't want to throw any of our customers under the bus, but it's...
Oh, yeah. This is not a customer. Obviously, this is just a friend, not a customer.
Yeah, it's someone I worked with at an old company. But think of if you're coming in to do a CPQ implementation, you're working with a person who's never done a CPQ implementation. So they have no context for what it really takes. They may have kind of a hope for it, but they don't really know. CFO certainly doesn't know. So when you come in and guide them, they're paying you to guide them to an extent, right?
Totally.
They're paying that insurance to be tucked in at night to know that you're going to cover their ass and make sure that the project is delivered on time and on target.
Yeah, exactly.
So based on the initial question of, how much should we be scoping up front versus allowing for flexibility, do you think there's anything we missed on that topic, or we cover it pretty thoroughly?
No, I think we're good.
We're good to go. Thanks for the time, man. Talk to you on the next one.
Thank you. Bye.